cafeteria security footage would later show 317 students, but only one knew how to fall without breaking. Emma Sullivan pressed her fingertips against the 3-inch scar on her left forearm, an unconscious habit she'd developed over the past 4 years. The raised tissue felt warmer than the surrounding skin, as if it still remembered the heat of twisted metal and shattered glass from that January night. Her father had taught her many things before he died: how to redirect an attacker's momentum, how to find balance in chaos, how to breathe through fear. But he'd never taught her what to do when the attacks came wrapped in privilege and protected by lawyers who billed $800 an hour. Preston Academy's library smelled like old money and fresh ambition. Oil paintings of deceased benefactors watched from mahogany panels as Emma hunched over her AP chemistry textbook, trying to lose herself in molecular structures while the late September sun slanted through leaded glass windows. She'd been coming here every day after school for 2 months now, finding sanctuary among students who treated her invisibility like a courtesy rather than a weapon. Hey, scholarship. The voice hit her spine like ice water. Mason Whitmore stood behind her chair, all 6'2" of Connecticut, breeding and lacrosse muscle. His friends Tyler, Connor, and Brad flanked him like wolves who'd learned to hunt in Brooks Brothers. Emma didn't turn around. The name's Emma. Right. Mason's hand landed on her notebook. Fingers splayed across her careful equations, his class ring a gaudy thing with the Whitmore family crest scratched across the paper. Emma, the girl who thinks she's too good to help out a classmate. I already told you, I don't do other people's homework. The library's silence pressed in around them. Other students had begun that careful choreography of pretending not to notice eyes fixed on books, earbuds suddenly essential, exits casually approached. Everyone at Preston knew the rules. You didn't cross a Whitmore, not when Mason's father's law firm occupied 3 floors of Hartford's most expensive real estate, not when his mother's maiden name graced half the buildings on campus. Mason leaned closer. His cologne, something expensive that probably cost more than her mother made in a 12-hour shift, filled her lungs. See, that's where you're confused. I'm not asking. Emma finally looked up, meeting his ice-blue eyes. Her father's voice echoed from 4 years ago. Real strength is knowing when not to use it. Mo store. But sometimes, Emma, sometimes the world doesn't give you that choice. Still no, Tyler snickered. Connor shifted his weight. Brad pulled out his phone, already recording because everything was content now, wasn't it? Every humiliation could be packaged and shared. Mason's jaw tightened. You know what your problem is? You don't understand how things work here. This isn't some public school where your little sob story matters. Nobody cares that your daddy died. Nobody cares that your mom works 2 jobs. You're here because the board needs to fill quotas, check boxes, charity cases like, you should be grateful. Mason, the voice cut through like a blade. Olivia Carter stood by the reference desk, her prosecutor mother's presence somehow channeled through her 17-year-old frame. Ms. Henderson's looking for you. Something about your last essay. It was a lie. They all knew it. But Olivia Carter was untouchable in her own way. Her mother was the only black district attorney the county had ever elected, and she'd put away 3 dirty cops last year alone. Even Whitmores tread carefully around that kind of power. Mason straightened, his hand leaving Emma's notebook. This isn't over. After they left, Olivia didn't come over. She just caught Emma's eye and nodded once before disappearing into the stacks. They weren't friends. Emma didn't really have friends at Preston, but there was solidarity and survival. Emma tried to return to her chemistry homework, but the formulas swam on the page. She touched her scar again, remembering. Her father had been picking her up from middle school. Black ice on Route 91. The drunk driver in the Escalade who'd walked away without a scratch, while her father bled out holding her hand, whispering in Irish, telling her she was brave, that she was loved, that she would survive this. And ditigi liat titim gan brisiad. Mostor. You can fall without breaking. The Aikido lessons had started when she was 7. Every Saturday morning in their garage, her father patient and laughing, she learned to redirect energy rather than meet it head-on. Fighting is easy, he'd say. Not fighting when you could, that's the hard part. She'd kept training even after he died, found a dojo that would take what her mother could afford, earned her brown belt 6 months ago. But what good was knowing 17 ways to dislocate a shoulder when your opponent's weapon was generational wealth? That night, Emma didn't tell her mother about Mason. Elena Sullivan had enough to worry about a double shift at Hartford Hospital. The second mortgage they'd taken out for Emma's Preston uniform and books. The insurance company still calling about bills from an accident 4 years past. Her mother had aged a decade in 4 years. Gray threading through black hair that had once been as glossy as Emma's own. How was school, mija? Her mother mixed languages when she was tired. Irish endearments giving way to the Spanish of her own childhood. Fine, Mom. Got an A on the history test? Of course you did. Elena's smile was worth every lie. Your father would be so proud. Would he? Patrick Sullivan had been a cop for 15 years. Third-generation Irish-American who'd learned that justice was more complicated than laws. Would he be proud that his daughter sat silent while boys who'd never known consequence circled like sharks? Or would he tell her that sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't the fight, but the moment before, when you still had the choice? The harassment started small, almost artistic in its deniability. Emma's locker began sticking. The mechanism mysteriously jammed. Her bike tires went flat. Homework disappeared from her bag, only to reappear water-damaged in Lost and Found. Each incident perfectly crafted to look like bad luck. The kind of misfortune that just happened to scholarship kids who didn't know their place. 2 weeks into October. The game changed. Emma was loading her bike outside the science building when they cornered her. Not in daylight this time, Preston's parking garage at 6:30. After her tutoring session with Ms. Chen. The concrete echoed with more than footsteps. All alone. Scholarship. Mason emerged from between cars, his lacrosse buddies spreading out in practiced formation. That's dangerous. Anything could happen. Emma's hands found her bike lock, the weight of it familiar. 24 ounces of hardened steel. Her father's voice, any object can be a weapon, but the best weapon is distance. I'm leaving. Are you? Tyler moved to block her path. Seems rude. Mason's trying to have a conversation. About respect, Mason added. About understanding the natural order of things. Connor laughed, the sound bouncing off concrete. Natural order? I like that. Emma's heartbeat steadied. This was what her body knew, adrenaline and assessment. 3 exits, 7 cars she could put between them. Her bike as a barrier, the lock as a last resort. But also security cameras in the corners, the red lights blinking. They were recording this, or they should have been. Funny thing about security systems, Mason said, reading her glance. They need maintenance. Sometimes they go down for hours. Terrible timing. Brad held up his phone. showing her the security app. Every camera in the garage showed static. "Ethan's good with computers," Mason continued. "Aren't you, Ethan?" Emma hadn't noticed the fifth boy, smaller than the others, hanging back by the stairwell. Ethan Park, sophomore, the kid whose little sister Emma had tutored in math last year. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Just want to talk?" Mason stepped closer. "About cooperation. About how things could be easier for everyone if you just—" He reached for her arm. Emma moved without thinking. 4 years of muscle memory took over. She didn't strike. Her father had been very clear about legal consequences for trained martial artists. Instead, she redirected, used Mason's own momentum, stepped aside as his weight carried him forward into the bike rack. The crash echoed through the garage. Mason went down hard, his designer jacket tearing on exposed metal. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mason pushed himself up, his face dark with something beyond anger. "You're done. You know that, done." But he didn't come at her again. Neither did the others. They left in a pack, Mason limping slightly, leaving Emma alone with her racing heart and the certainty that she'd just made everything worse. What she didn't see was Ethan Park, still hidden in the stairwell, lowering the phone he'd been holding, the phone that had been recording everything while he'd pretended to jam the cameras. The meeting came 2 days later. Not a suspension that would have required admitting something had happened. Instead, Emma found herself in Principal Morrison's office with her mother, facing Richard Whitmore across a conference table that cost more than their car. "Assault." Richard Whitmore said the word like he was savoring wine. "That's what we're discussing here. Your daughter assaulted my son." Elena Sullivan's hands clenched in her lap. She'd left work for this. Would have to make up the hours on weekend. "Emma, what happened?" Before Emma could answer, the door opened. A man in a rumpled suit entered. Korean-American, maybe 40, carrying a battered briefcase. "Sorry I'm late." He handed a card to the principal. "David Kim. I'm representing Ms. Sullivan." Richard Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Since when does a scholarship student have counsel?" "Since now," David Kim smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I had the privilege of training with Emma's father. Patrick Sullivan saved my younger brother's life once, pulled him out of a burning car on I-91. I owe the Sullivan family a debt." Emma had never heard this story. Her mother's sharp intake of breath said she hadn't either. "Now," David continued, settling into his chair with the comfort of someone who'd sat across from bigger sharks, "let's discuss what actually happened. Connecticut General Statutes. Confrontation 59s, harassment, up to 90 days incarceration. Your son and his friends surrounded my client in an isolated location after tampering with security equipment. That's also Section 53A251, unlawful electronic surveillance. You have no proof, don't I?" David pulled out his phone. Interesting thing about Preston's security system, it backs up to the cloud every 30 seconds, even if someone thinks they've disabled it. There's always a ghost in the machine. It was a bluff. Emma could see it in the way David's thumb never actually unlocked his phone. But Richard Whitmore didn't know that. "What do you want? For your son to leave my client alone. Complete cessation of contact. Or we can discuss this further in a courtroom, where I'll be happy to subpoena every text message, every social media post, every witness to your son's behavior over the past month. How do you think that plays in the Hartford Courant Whitmore heir accused of targeted harassment?" The silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, Richard Whitmore stood. "Mason will maintain appropriate distance, but if your client puts hands on my son again—" "She won't need to," David said quietly. Will she? After the Whitmores left. David Kim turned to Emma. Your father was a good man. He'd be proud of how you handled yourself. But be careful, men like Richard Whitmore don't forget. That night, Emma found her mother sitting in Patrick Sullivan's study, a room they'd kept exactly as he'd left it. Legal books and case files, his badge in its shadow box, the folded flag from his funeral. A lawyer, Elena said softly. He would have liked that. Someone fighting for you. Emma sat beside her mother, both of them looking at the photograph on the desk, Patrick Sullivan in uniform, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. He'd been 38 when he died, younger than Emma's chemistry teacher. I'm scared, Mom. It was the first time she'd admitted it. Elena pulled her close, and Emma breathed in the hospital smell that never quite left her mother's scrubs. I know, Mostor, but you're your father's daughter. You'll find a way through. Mostor, my treasure. Her father had called her that too. The next morning, Mason kept his distance. So did everyone else. Emma moved through Preston's halls in a bubble of isolation. Neither victim nor victor. Just alone. Even Olivia's nods became less frequent. Nobody wanted to be collateral damage in a Whitmore war. But something had shifted in Mason's tactics. The physical harassment stopped, replaced by something more insidious. Whispers followed Emma through hallways. Instagram stories she wasn't tagged in, but somehow always saw photographs of her mother's beat-up Honda in the hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. Captioned, "Some people work really hard for their kids' education," with laughing emojis. Then came the photo that changed everything. Emma found it slipped under her locker on a Thursday afternoon. Her mother, exhausted after a 16-hour shift, asleep in her car in the hospital garage. The angle suggested someone had been watching, waiting, on the back. In Mason's handwriting, interesting immigration status. Would be a shame if someone made a call. Her mother had been born in Hartford. Her grandparents had come from Puebla in the 60s. Legal residents who'd built a restaurant from nothing. But Mason didn't care about truth. He cared about fear. That's when Emma understood. David Kim had won a battle. But wars weren't fought in conference rooms. They were fought in shadows and whispers, in the spaces between what was legal and what was possible. She kept the photo, carried it like her father had carried his badge, a reminder of what she was protecting. October bled into November. Emma stopped eating lunch, stopped lingering after class. She became a ghost, haunting her own life. Present, but untouchable. The breaking point came the week before Thanksgiving. I have a proposition. Mason caught her at her locker, alone but for the 100 students streaming past. He looked different, controlled, like someone who'd recalculated their approach. Prom's coming up. Emma almost laughed. You're joking. I need a date. Someone. Unexpected. Makes me look good, like I'm branching out. You need me to forget about that interesting photo, about your mother's documentation. She was born here. Prove it. While she's suspended from work pending investigation. While lawyers who actually charge $800 an hour pick apart every document. He leaned against the lockers, casual as discussing weather. Or you could wear a pretty dress, smile for pictures, and everyone wins. Emma's hand went to her scar. The habit betrayed her. Mason's eyes tracked the movement, filing the information away. I'll think about it. You do that. But Emma, his smile was all teeth. Don't think too long. That night, Emma stood in her garage, working through Aikido forms in the space where her father had first taught her to fall. Her body moved through the familiar patterns, Irimi, Tenkan, Kokiyu, enter, turn, breathe, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating angles of a different kind. She could expose Mason, but with what proof? His threats were verbal, his weapons systemic. She could fight, but fighting back had only escalated things. She could comply, wear the dress, play the part, hope he'd get bored. Or Emma stopped mid-form, an idea taking shape. Her father had taught her that the best throw used the opponent's own force. What if she could do the same with Mason's cruelty? The plan formed slowly, carefully. She'd need help, not from adults who moved in systems Mason's family owned, but from someone who understood the shadows. The next day, she found Ethan Park in the computer lab. "I know what you did," she said quietly, sitting beside him. "In the parking garage. You recorded it." Ethan's fingers froze over his keyboard. "I don't know what you mean." "You were protecting yourself, creating evidence in case they turned on you." Emma had figured it out later. The angle's wrong for the security story to make sense. "I'm not angry. I'm asking for help." "I can't. You don't understand what they could do to my family. My sister goes to Franklin Middle. I know. I tutored her." Emma pulled out the photo of her mother. "He's threatening my family, too." Ethan stared at the image. "This is sick." "Yes, so help me end it." "How?" Emma told him, watched his eyes widen as she laid out the pieces. It was dangerous. It was probably illegal. It was exactly the kind of plan her father would have hated and understood. "You're talking about destroying him. I'm talking about letting him destroy himself." Emma touched her scar again. "My father used to say that the hardest throw to counter is the one you do to yourself." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Then what do you need me to do?" The pieces moved into place over the next 2 weeks. Emma agreed to prom. Let Mason parade her acceptance like a trophy. His friends laughed. The school whispered. But Emma endured, knowing every humiliation was building towards something larger. She didn't know that Ethan was building something too. Not just the program she'd asked for, but a comprehensive archive. Every racist joke in the group chat, every cruel video, every moment these boys had thought themselves untouchable because they controlled the cameras. December arrived with snow and finals. Emma maintained her grades, maintained her facade, maintained her sanity by practicing forms in the garage each night. Her mother worried, but didn't push. Elena Sullivan had learned to trust her daughter's silences. The Friday before winter break dawned crisp and bright. Emma dressed carefully, jeans that fit well, but not too well. Her father's old Dropkick Murphys t-shirt under a cardigan. She touched her scar once, a salute to the man who'd taught her to fight, without fighting. Then she went to school. The cafeteria at Preston Academy could hold 300 students. That Friday, it held 317, though the extra 17 were various faculty and staff grabbing coffee between periods. The lunch lines moved with practiced efficiency. The social hierarchies arranged themselves at predictable tables. Emma sat alone, as always, picking at a turkey sandwich she wouldn't finish. She saw Mason before he saw her. Watched him work the room like a politician. All easy smiles and casual power. His boys flanked him. A moving wall of privilege. She knew something was different when Ethan Park appeared at Mason's shoulder. Whispering urgently, Mason's face changed. The smile curdling into something darker. He looked across the cafeteria, found Emma, and started walking. The cafeteria noticed. Conversations died in ripples as Mason crossed the room. Phones appeared like weapons drawn. Everyone sensed blood in the water. "You think you're clever," Mason's voice carried in the sudden quiet. "You think you can play games with me?" Emma set down her sandwich. "I don't know what you mean." "Ethan told me everything. Your little plan, recording devices, trying to set me up." He was playing to the crowd now, voice pitched to Carrie. "Everyone needs to know what we're dealing with here. This scholarship case, this nobody. Tried to entrap me, tried to create some fake evidence because she can't handle that she doesn't belong here." Emma stood slowly. Around them, the cafeteria held its breath. "I didn't—" "Shut up." Mason stepped closer. "You want to play with the big kids? Fine, but first, everyone's going to see what you really are." What happened next would be dissected in courtrooms and living rooms. In hushed conversations and therapy sessions, the security footage would show 17 different angles. But only Emma felt the moment stretch like taffy, time dilating the way it had the night her father died. Mason lunged forward. Not to strike, he was too smart for that. Instead, his hands shot past her shoulders, fingers hooking into fabric at her back. The sound of elastic snapping was gunshot loud in the silent cafeteria. Emma felt the strap of her bra go slack, felt the violation of it like a physical blow, heard the gasps and nervous laughter, saw phones lifting to record her humiliation. But she also felt something else. 4 years of training. 4 years of falling without breaking. 4 years of her father's voice. Antigliat, titim gan brisiad. Mostor. Time snapped back to normal speed. Emma moved. Later. Emma would barely remember the specifics of the movement. Her body knew what her mind couldn't process, that survival sometimes happens in the space between heartbeats. She didn't strike Mason. She didn't need to. Aikido had taught her that the most devastating force was the one already in motion. Mason's lunge had committed his weight forward. His center of gravity extended past his base. Emma's hands found his wrists as they pulled at her clothing. She pivoted on her left foot tenkan, the turning movement her father had drilled until it became breathing. Her hip checked his momentum, meant to humiliate her, became the engine of his own destruction. Physics took over where intention ended. Mason Whitmore flew. 6 feet 2 inches of lacrosse muscle and generational privilege arced through the cafeteria air like a discarded coat. His body rotated a perfect tomoe nage, though Emma hadn't planned it, hadn't thought beyond the electric need to reclaim her space, her dignity, her father's teachings in one fluid motion. He landed hard. The sound was wet and wrong bone meeting linoleum with a crack that silenced even the nervous laughter. Mason's right shoulder hit first, the joint separating with an audible pop. His collarbone followed, snapping like kindling as 317 people watched a Whitmore fall. The scream that tore from Mason's throat was animal, primitive. He writhed on the floor, his right arm hanging at an impossible angle, his perfect face twisted in agony and shock. "My arm. She broke my arm." Emma stood over him, her hands still raised in defensive position, her father's shirt intact, but her whole body shaking. Not with fear, with the release of 4 years of held breath. "Actually," Ethan Park's voice cut through the chaos, loud and clear and absolutely done with being afraid. "She didn't break anything. You broke yourself." Every head turned. Ethan stood on a lunch table, his phone raised high, the screen showing an Instagram live interface. 47,000 viewers and climbing, he announced. "Hi, everyone. You just watched Mason Whitmore sexually assault a classmate and then hurt himself attacking her. But wait, there's more. Ethan, what the hell? Tyler started forward, but Ethan just smiled. 60 days of footage, every conversation, every threat, every time you made someone feel small because you could. His fingers danced across his phone. Including last Tuesday when you guys planned this whole thing. Did you really think I was that stupid that I'd help you hurt her after she tutored my sister for free? The cafeteria erupted. Teachers rushed in. Someone called 911. Through it all, Emma remained still, a statue in the eye of the storm. She watched them load Mason onto a stretcher, his father's threats already echoing from the hallway where Richard Whitmore had materialized like summoned demon. You'll pay for this. You hear me? Nobody touches a Whitmore. But David Kim was already there too, moving through the crowd with quiet purpose. He caught Emma's eye and nodded once. I've got this. Principal Morrison tried to restore order, but the damage was done. 47,000 had become 90,000. The video was being screen-recorded, shared, dissected. Preston assault started trending before Mason even reached the hospital. Emma, Olivia Carter, appeared at her elbow. Come on, my mom's on her way. Emma let herself be led from the cafeteria, past the whispers and the cameras and the broken boy who'd thought consequences were for other people. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. Her father's voice seemed very far away. In the nurse's office, she finally broke. Not crying, she was her father's daughter. After all but shaking so hard, the thermometer rattled against her teeth. Olivia sat beside her, solid and quiet, a reminder that not everyone at Preston had forgotten how to be human. That was beautiful, Olivia said finally. The throw. Textbook Tomoe Nage. Emma looked at her in surprise. My mom made me take judo for 3 years, said a black girl needed to know how to make people respect her space. Olivia smiled grimly. Never had to use it like that. Though, I didn't mean to hurt him that badly. Yes, you did. And that's okay. He earned every break. The door burst open. Elena Sullivan stood there, still in scrubs, her face a map of fear and fury. Emma, mija, are you? Emma fell into her mother's arms, breathing in hospital disinfectant and home. I'm okay, Mom, I'm okay. But she wasn't. Not yet. The next hours blurred together. Police statements, medical examinations, lawyer consultations. David Kim worked his phone like a conductor, orchestrating a defense before charges were even filed. The video had gone viral, not just Ethan's live stream, but security footage from a dozen angles, all showing the same story. A girl defending herself. A boy who'd thought his name was Armor learning it was just letters. The other videos started surfacing that night. Ethan's 60-day archive, released in waves. Mason pushing a freshman downstairs. Tyler destroying a scholarship student's art project. Brad rating girls' bodies in the locker room. Connor using racial slurs he'd thought were private. By morning, Preston Academy was national news. The arraignment happened Monday. Emma sat between her mother and David Kim, watching Mason wheeled in with his arm in a complex brace. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His father sat behind him, radiating expensive rage. The judge, Rebecca Hayes, 5 feet 2 inches of steel wrapped in judicial robes, reviewed the evidence with the kind of thorough care that made Richard Whitmore squirm. Mr. Whitmore, she said finally, her voice carrying despite its softness. In my 23 years on the bench, I've seen a lot of boys who thought their names meant more than their actions. You sexually assaulted a classmate, on camera, in front of witnesses. The fact that she defended herself expertly, I might add, doesn't change that. Your Honor, my client's injuries are the direct result of his own actions. Judge Hayes cut off Whitmore's lawyer with surgical precision. Connecticut law is clear. A person may use reasonable physical force when they reasonably believe it necessary to defend against sexual assault. Ms. Sullivan's response was textbook self-defense. She looked directly at Mason. Young man, you're lucky this is juvenile court. You're lucky Ms. Sullivan's training emphasized control. You're lucky you're not facing federal charges for the threats against her mother. The sentence came down like a hammer. 8 months in juvenile detention, 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, sex offender registration that would follow him past his trust fund and into whatever future he'd imagined. Richard Whitmore stood. This is a miscarriage of justice. We'll appeal. You'll sit down, Judge Hayes said quietly, or you'll be held in contempt. Your son is a sexual predator who terrorized a young woman for months. The fact that she knew how to fight back doesn't make her the aggressor. It makes her a survivor. Emma felt something crack open in her chest. Not her ribs, those were merely bruised. Something deeper. 4 years of carrying her father's death, of being strong for her mother, of shrinking herself to fit in spaces that didn't want her. All of it broke open in that courtroom, spilling out like light. The civil suit took longer but hit harder. $2.5 million. The Whitmores fought it, of course. But Ethan's archive was devastating. Email threads planning harassment campaigns, text messages coordinating attacks, a systematic pattern of abuse that Preston Academy had enabled through willful blindness. Emma didn't want the money, didn't need it. But David Kim convinced her to take it. Justice isn't just about punishment, he said over coffee in his cluttered office. It's about transformation. What would your father want you to do with this? She knew immediately. The Sullivan Dojo opened 6 months later in a converted warehouse in Hartford's North End. Not the pristine suburbs where places like Preston Academy groomed the next generation of Mason Whitmores, but the real world where kids like Emma learned to navigate violence without safety nets. The first class had 12 students, girls mostly, but some boys too. Kids who'd seen the video and recognized something in Emma's story. Kids who knew what it was like to shrink yourself, to calculate the cost of taking up space. My father taught me Aikido, Emma said, standing before them in a simple gi. The scar on her arm was visible now she'd stopped hiding it. But more than that, he taught me that real strength isn't about hurting people. It's about protecting what matters. Protecting yourself. Protecting others. Protecting your right to exist without apology. She demonstrated a basic stance, watching them mirror her movements. In the mirror, she caught sight of the photos lining the wall. Her father in uniform, Judge Hayes at the dojo's opening, Olivia and her mother cutting the ribbon, even Ethan, who'd become something like a friend, teaching coding classes in the room next door because self-defense came in many forms. The first thing you need to learn, Emma continued, is how to fall. A hand raised, a girl, maybe 14, with scared eyes and careful posture. Why falling? Emma smiled, hearing her father's voice mix with her own. Because everyone falls. The question is whether you break or whether you roll with it and come up ready. They practiced falling for the rest of the hour. Emma moving between them, adjusting positions, offering encouragement. Her mother worked the front desk, having quit one of her jobs now that they didn't need the money. Elena's smile had returned, the gray in her hair somehow elegant rather than exhausted. After class, Emma found herself alone in the dojo. She moved through her forms in the quiet, muscle memory and meditation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mason's latest victim, a girl from Preston who'd found the courage to report him violating his probation. Another small victory in a war that never really ended. But that was okay. Emma had learned that justice wasn't a destination, but a practice. Like Aikido, like healing, like the choice made daily. To take up space in a world that would always have its Mason Whitmores. The door chimed. A woman entered, holding the hand of a girl maybe 7 years old. Is this the place that teaches girls to fight back? Emma studied them, the careful way they moved, the protective angle of the mother's body, the way the girl's eyes darted to exits. She knew that dance, had performed it herself. This is the place that teaches girls they're worth fighting for. Emma corrected gently. First class is free. As they filled out paperwork, Emma touched her scar one more time, not hiding it now, but honoring it. Her father had died saving her from one kind of crash. He'd be proud that she'd learned to save herself from another. The Sullivan Dojo grew. First 20 students, then 50, then 200. They opened a second location, added legal advocacy services, created a safe house for those escaping abuse. What had started as one girl's refusal to break became a movement. Quiet, but unstoppable. Sometimes, late at night, when the dojo was empty, Emma would stand where that first class had gathered. She'd think about Mason Whitmore, serving his time in a facility that looked nothing like Preston Academy. About Richard Whitmore's firm hemorrhaging clients after the full scope of his son's behavior became public. About Ethan Park, who'd gotten into MIT on a full scholarship and sent her updates on the apps he was building to help victims document abuse. But mostly, she thought about her father, about falling without breaking, about the difference between can't fight and won't fight, about the moment in the cafeteria when time had slowed and she'd had to choose victim or survivor, silence or strength, their story or hers. She'd chosen hers, and in doing so, had helped hundreds of others choose theirs too. Emma looked directly at the camera, knowing that somewhere Mason might be watching, that Richard Whitmore might be seething, that every Preston Academy parent might be clutching their pearls. My only regret, she said clearly, is that it took me so long to remember my father's most important lesson, which was that falling isn't failing, it's flying with style. And sometimes, when someone tries to push you down, the best response is to help them fall instead. The Sullivan Dojo's motto, painted in her father's favorite green, stretched across the wall behind her, and Tiglat Titim Gan Brisead, you can fall without breaking. But Emma had learned something her father hadn't lived to teach her. Sometimes, when the world tried to break you, the strongest thing you could do was break it right back, gently, precisely, with exactly the amount of force required to create space for something better to grow. Emma Sullivan had been pushed. She'd fallen, she'd flown, and she'd taught others to do the same. The camera crew had barely left when a young woman appeared at the dojo's door. Emma almost didn't recognize her designer clothes replaced with simple jeans, perfect makeup abandoned for a tear-streaked face. "You're Mason's cousin," Emma said quietly. "Belle, right." Belle Whitmore nodded. unable to meet Emma's eyes. I was there. That day. I laughed. Emma waited. He did it to me, too, when I was 14, at a family party. The words tumbled out like water breaking through a dam. Everyone said I was being dramatic, that Whitmores don't air dirty laundry, that cousins just play around sometimes. Emma's chest tightened. She stepped aside. Come in. They sat in the office, surrounded by photos of students who'd found their strength within these walls. Belle's story spilled out years of silence, of family pressure, of watching Mason hurt others while her own pain calcified into shame. I'm testifying, Belle said finally, at his probation hearing. My therapist says it's time to stop protecting the family name and start protecting myself. Emma reached across the desk, offering her hand. Belle took it, her grip surprisingly strong. The first thing you need to learn, Emma said gently, is how to fall. Belle's laugh was broken but real. I think I already know that part. No, Emma corrected, thinking of her father, of Mason, of every moment that had led to this one. You know how to break, there's a difference, but I can teach you, if you're ready to learn. Belle squeezed her hand. I'm ready. Outside, Hartford's skyline glowed in the setting sun. Somewhere, a Whitmore empire was crumbling. Somewhere, a girl was learning to fight back. And in a converted warehouse, where falling became flying, another survivor began her journey home.